I hadn't heard their voices in years, not since the day they left me alone at that train station and called it a lesson. But this morning my phone would not stop ringing. 29 missed calls from the same people who once watched me beg and walked away like it meant nothing. They always said it made me stronger, that it was for my own good, but what they never realized is that I kept everything, every detail, every proof of what they did and where it led, because when the truth finally started moving through the system, it did not stop at shame. It turned into something much bigger, something official, something that people in suits take seriously. And now everything they tried to bury is coming back all at once. The calls, the panic, the silence breaking on their side, not mine. And this is the part they never planned for, because this is not about forgiveness. This is about revenge. And if you think this ends quietly, you are about to find out how wrong that is. Hi everyone, I am your host, and this is the story they never thought I would tell. Chapter 1. I hadn't heard my sister's voice in over 20 years, so the second she said my name, I knew something was wrong. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment in Denver, finishing a client project, half listening to the hum of traffic outside. I almost ignored the call. I always ignore unknown numbers, but it kept ringing, steady and patient, like it wasn't going away until I picked up. So I did. I didn't say anything at first. I just held the phone to my ear. There was a pause, then a breath, and then her voice. "Elara, it's me, Hannah." Everything inside me tightened, not all at once, slowly, like something I had buried deep down was waking up whether I wanted it to or not. I still didn't answer. She started talking quickly, like she was afraid I would hang up. "Mum is sick. Dad too. Things are bad. They've been asking about you. They want to see you." I stared at the wall across from me. It was blank, except for the soft shadow of the blinds. For a second, I felt 13 again, waiting, listening, trying to figure out what I was supposed to say to make things okay. I pushed at feeling down. "I don't have a family there," I said. My voice sounded calm, flat, like it belonged to someone else. Silence stretched between us. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "People are talking, Elara, about that night at the station." My grip tightened around the phone. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I ended the call. The apartment felt smaller after that, like the air had changed. I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, trying to convince myself it didn't matter. But that night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same place. Chicago, Union Station, winter, 2010. I was 13. My mother had been unusually gentle that day. That should have been the first sign. She smiled more than usual, touched my shoulder like she meant it, even bought me something sweet on the way. We took the train into the city together. I remember the cold air when we stepped inside the station, the smell of coffee and metal, the sound of footsteps echoing off high ceilings. It felt big, busy, safe. I sat down near one of the platforms. My father stood nearby, quiet as always. My mother handed me a small paper bag. Inside was a pastry, still warm. I remember thinking it tasted better than anything I had eaten in a long time. Then she looked at me and said she and my father needed to step away for a minute. "Stay right here. We'll be back." I nodded. I always nodded. They walked away together. I watched them go until they disappeared into the crowd. At first, nothing felt wrong. 10 minutes passed. I checked the clock again. People came and went. I expected to see them any second. Half an hour. I checked the clock again. People came and went. I expected to see them any second. An hour. The noise around me started to change, or maybe I did. Every sound felt sharper, louder, like it was pressing in on me. I stood up and looked around. "Mum," I called, not too loud. No answer. I tried again, louder this time. A few people glanced at me, then looked away, like they were a problem they didn't want to deal with. A family sat down across from me. They laughed about something I couldn't hear. A few minutes later, they stood up and left together. I stayed. That was when the thoughts settled in, slow and heavy. They weren't coming back. I stood in the middle of that station, surrounded by people, and felt something inside me give way. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet. I wasn't lost. I had been left. The tears came before I could stop them. I wiped them away quickly, trying to keep my head down. I didn't want anyone to notice. I didn't want to make it worse. That was the rule at home. Don't make things worse. I sat back down, clutching that empty paper bag in my hands like it meant something. My hands were shaking. "Are you okay?" The voice came from beside me. I looked up. A woman stood there, maybe in her 40s, wearing a dark jacket and a name tag that caught the light when she leaned closer. Maria. Her face wasn't annoyed. It wasn't confused. She looked at me like I mattered. I shook my head. "Where are your parents?" My throat felt tight. "They said they'd be back." She glanced around the station, then back at me, her expression changing in a way I didn't understand yet. "How long have you been here?" I didn't know how to answer that. "A long time," I said. She crouched down so we were at the same level. "I'm Maria. I work here. I'm going to help you, okay?" Help. The word felt strange. I nodded slowly. She didn't rush me. She didn't ask too many questions at once. She just stayed there, steady and calm, like she wasn't going anywhere. For the first time that day, I wasn't completely alone. I looked down at my hands, still shaking, still clutching that empty paper bag, and something shifted inside me. It wasn't just that they had left. It was how easy it had been for them to do it. I didn't know it then, sitting there under those bright station lights with a stranger beside me, but that moment everything changed. Because some choices don't disappear. They wait, and one day they take everything back.
Chapter 2. They do not tell you when the story about you changes. It just happens quietly, somewhere behind your back, until one day you realize you are no longer the person you remember being. I used to think that night at the station was the beginning of everything. That was the clean version, the easier version. One moment, one betrayal, one line you could point to and say that was it. But the truth is, it started long before that. It started with what they called lessons. I was 9 when I knocked over a vase in the kitchen. I had barely touched the counter, just enough to make it wobble. It fell and shattered across the tile, sharp and loud. My mother walked in, calm as ever. I tried to explain. I told her it was an accident. She looked at me like that word did not exist. "Accidents are just excuses," she said. "People use them when they do not want to take responsibility." Then she opened the back door. It was freezing outside, the kind of cold that made your fingers ache almost immediately. She told me to step out and think about what I had done. I thought it would be a few minutes. It was not. I stood there until my legs went numb, watching the window, waiting for her to come back. Cars passed on the street. A neighbor walked their dog and glanced at me like I was something strange left outside by mistake. I remember that look more than the cold, like I didn't belong anywhere. When she finally let me back in, she did not ask if I was okay. She asked if I understood. I said yes. That was the first time I learned that pain could be framed as a lesson. When I was 11, I forgot to turn in an assignment, just one worksheet, nothing important. That night, my father sat me down at the dining table. "Read it," he said. I didn't understand at first. Out loud, he added. I read every question I got wrong, every answer I missed. My voice shook at the beginning. I could feel my face getting hot. At some point, I heard them laughing, not loudly, not cruelly in an obvious way, just enough. My mother leaned back in her chair and said, "Embarrassment builds character." My father told me to keep going, so I did. I kept reading until my voice stopped shaking, until something inside me went quiet. That was the second lesson. If you feel humiliated long enough, it starts to feel normal. And the worst part was, I believed them. I believed that was what love looked like. That was what discipline meant. That was how you became someone worth keeping. Which is why what happened at the station never made sense, because there was no lesson in it. They did not come back. They did not explain. They didn't even look for me. Back in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone like it might give me a different version of reality if I waited long enough. Alex stood in the doorway for a while before speaking. "You want to talk about it?" I nodded. The words came out slower than I expected. Not dramatic, not clean, just pieces. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. "You know you don't owe them anything, right?" I let out a small breath. "I know." He shook his head slightly. "No, I mean it. You don't owe them your time, your forgiveness, or your attention. Not after that." I looked at him. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. It sat with me in a way nothing else had. But it did not change what was already happening. Hannah kept calling. At first, I ignored it. I flipped my phone over, muted it, tried to pretend it wasn't there. But it kept coming, again and again. By the second day, I had 29 missed calls. It wasn't the number that got to me, it was the persistence, like she knew something I didn't. On the third night, I opened the messages. Most of them were short, just my name. Some were longer, rushed, like she had typed them without thinking. You need to know what they said. People are starting to talk. They told everyone you left, that you couldn't handle rules, that you were always difficult. That one stayed on the screen longer than the others. I stared at it. Then I scrolled. The last message was different. You don't know how much they lied, and now it's coming back on them. Something in me shifted, not toward them, toward the story, because I had lived one version of it, and apparently they had been telling another. I called her back. She picked up almost immediately. "I didn't think you'd call," she said. "I almost didn't." There was a pause. Then she started talking. "After you were gone, they told everyone you left," she said, "that you couldn't handle rules, that you were always difficult." I let out a quiet breath. "Of course they did." "It worked," she added. "People believed them." I closed my eyes. People always believe the first version they hear. "Not just that," she continued. "They said you had problems, that you were unstable." That word hit harder than the rest. Unstable. It was simple, clean, and impossible to argue with once it was out there. I thought about the looks I used to get after that year, the way people avoided eye contact, the whispers that stopped when I walked into a room. I had always assumed it was because I disappeared. Now I knew better. They had rewritten me, and everyone accepted it. "What changed?" I asked. There was a shift in her voice. "Someone remembered," she said. "A woman who worked at the station back then. She saw your name online and recognized it." I sat up straighter. "She told someone," Hannah continued, "and it started spreading. Slowly, but enough." Enough for what? Enough for people to start asking questions. I could hear it now. Fear. "The store is losing customers," she said. "People are talking, not directly, but it's happening." "And them?" "Mom had a stroke," she said quietly. "Not severe, but enough to scare her. Dad's trying to hold everything together, but he's losing control." I leaned back against the wall. "Do they regret it?" She hesitated. "No," she said. "They're just afraid of losing everything." That should not have surprised me, but hearing it still felt like something settling into place. I walked to the window, looking out at the street below. For years, I had lived with their version of me sitting somewhere in the background, shaping things in ways I never fully understood. Now it was unraveling, not because they chose to tell the truth, because they were forced to. "I'm not coming back for them," I said. "I know. Then why do you keep calling?" "Because you deserve to know," she said, "and because this is not over." I stayed quiet. Not over. Maybe it never had been. I thought about what Alex said. You don't owe them anything. He was right. This was not about them. It was about taking back something they had rewritten. I turned away from the window. "I'm coming back to Illinois," I said. Hannah wasn't surprised. "Okay." "Not to fix anything," I added. "I know." I tightened my grip on the phone. "I'm coming back to see what really happened." There was a pause on her end, a long one, and something about that silence made it clear. I was not walking back into the past. I was walking into something that had been waiting for me.
Chapter 3. The town felt smaller the second I crossed the county line. Not physically smaller, not in a way you could measure, but in the way memory lies to you over time. Everything that once felt overwhelming now looked contained, almost manageable. The streets, the buildings, even the sky felt closer. But the feeling underneath it all had not changed. I drove past places I barely recognized until something about them pulled at me. A corner, a sign, the shape of a parking lot. Pieces of a life I had not lived in 20 years, still sitting exactly where I left them. I did not go to the house. I was not ready for that. Instead, I went to the station. It stood where it always had, steady and unchanged, like it had been waiting for me in a way nothing else had. The sign out front was newer, cleaner, but the building itself carried the same weight. I parked and stayed in the car longer than I meant to. My hands rested on the wheel, fingers still, like if I moved too soon, I might break whatever control I had left. Then I stepped out. The air inside hit me first. Coffee, metal, something faintly stale that never really disappears from places like this. It pulled me back without asking. I walked in slowly, scanning the room before I even realized I was doing it. And then I saw her. Maria stood behind the counter. Older now, her hair thinner, her movements more careful, but her presence was the same. She looked up when I approached, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to place me. It took a moment. Then it clicked. "Oh my God," she said, her voice soft but certain. "Is that you?" I nodded. She moved around the counter quickly, faster than I expected, and pulled me into a hug. It was immediate, instinctual, like she'd been holding on to that moment without realizing it. "I used to wonder what happened to you," she said. "I wondered too," I replied. She stepped back, still holding on to my arms, studying my face. "You came back," she said. I needed answers. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise, recognition. "Come with me," she said quietly. She led me into a small office behind the counter. The space was cramped, filled with old paperwork and cabinets that looked like they had not been replaced in decades. She closed the door behind us, then leaned against it for a second. "I remember that night." I did not respond. "I remember it because it did not make sense," she continued. "Parents who lose a child do not act like that." My chest tightened. "What did you see?" She exhaled slowly. "I saw them leave," she said. "Together, calm, no panic, no urgency. They walked out like they had somewhere else to be." My jaw tightened. "They didn't come back," she added. "Not for a long time." "How long?" "Over 3 hours," she said. "Long enough that people started asking questions before they did." 3 hours. The number settled heavily. "They knew," I said. Maria did not argue. She moved to a cabinet and pulled out a worn folder, flipping it open with careful hands. "I kept a copy of the report." She handed it to me. I read the line once, then again. "Parents left the area and did not return for over 3 hours." It was not a guess. It was not a memory. It was written down, documented, real. For a second, I thought I might have misread it, like my brain was trying to protect me from something too simple to be true. But it was there, clear, unavoidable. They knew exactly what they were doing, I said quietly. Maria's voice softened. I think they did. I closed the folder and handed it back. Thank you, I said. She looked at me, her eyes steady. You were not forgotten, she said. You were left. The difference hit harder than anything else. I nodded once, then turned and walked out. The drive to meet Hannah felt shorter than it should have, or maybe I just stopped noticing the distance. She was waiting inside a small diner off the main road, sitting in a booth near the window. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, like she wasn't sure if I would actually walk through the door. You came, she said. I said I would. We sat down across from each other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned forward. There's something I remember, she said, something I didn't understand back then. I felt my focus sharpen. What? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. I heard Mom talking a few days after. She thought I was asleep. I stayed still. What did she say? She swallowed slowly. She said it was a bet. The words didn't make sense at first. A bet? She nodded slowly. $50, she said. She wanted to see how long you would last on your own. For a second, everything went quiet. Not silent, still, like something inside me had shut off all at once. Then it hit, sharp, sudden. My chest tightened, my breath catching in a way I couldn't control. For a moment, I thought I had heard her wrong, like my mind was refusing to process something so small could carry that much cruelty. $50, I repeated. Hannah nodded. They laughed about it, she said softly. Not a daughter, not even a person, just something to test. I leaned back slowly, staring at the table without really seeing it. All those years, all the questions, all the ways I tried to make sense of it. There was no deeper reason, no hidden explanation, just that. I let out a breath, but it didn't feel like relief. Did Dad say anything? She shook her head. He thought it was funny. Of course he did. I pushed myself up from the booth. Where are you going? She asked. To see them. Her expression tightened. You don't have to do that right now. I know, but I'm going anyway. I left before she could stop me. The house came into view faster than I expected. Same driveway, same porch, same windows that used to feel like they were always watching. I parked across the street and stayed there for a moment, my hands resting loosely in my lap. 20 years, and nothing about them had changed. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the edge of the driveway. The lights were on inside. Through the window, I could see them. My mother sat in a chair, her posture stiff, her movements slower but controlled. Her posture stiff, her movements slower but controlled. My father paced nearby, his steps sharp, restless, like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. The way he moved caught my attention. Not calm, not confident, waiting. And suddenly, it was clear. This was not just about what they did. Something was already happening, something they couldn't control anymore. They thought they had finished the story. They thought they had already won. They just didn't realize the part that mattered hadn't even started yet. I stood there watching them, feeling something settle into place. Not anger anymore, something colder, more precise, because this time I wasn't the one being tested. This time I was the one who knew the rules, and I was finally ready to change them. I did not knock. For a second, my hand rested on the door, feeling the solid weight of it under my palm. This was the same door I used to stand behind as a kid, waiting for permission to come in, waiting to be told what I had done wrong. I turned the handle and walked in anyway.
The room went quiet the moment I stepped inside. My mother saw me first. Her face went pale, her body going still like she was looking at something that did not belong in front of her. My father turned a second later. He did not move at first, just stared, trying to place me. Then it clicked. "Oh my God," my mother whispered. "Is that you?" I closed the door behind me. "I am not here to visit," I said. My father straightened slightly, his voice tightening as he spoke. "You came back," he said. "We knew you would." I shook my head. "I did not come back for you." My mother took a step forward, her hands trembling. "We thought about you every day," she said. "We never stopped." I looked at her. It sounded practiced, like something she had said out loud before. "You left me in a public train station for over 3 hours. You do not get to rewrite that." She flinched. Her eyes darted toward my father for a second before coming back to me. "It was not supposed to happen like that," he said quickly. "We thought you would come back. We thought you would ask for help. You thought I would perform for you," I said. He frowned. "You were trying to teach me responsibility." I let out a short breath. "You locked me outside in the winter when I was 9. You made me stand there until I stopped shaking." My mother's face tightened. "That was discipline," she said. "You made me read my mistakes out loud while you laughed. You called that character." My father shifted his weight. "You turned it into a lesson. You always needed structure." I nodded slowly. "And leaving me alone in a train station?" I asked. "What was that supposed to be?" Neither of them answered right away. Then my father spoke again. "A mistake," he said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the report. I set it down on the table between us. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the room. He looked down at it, then back at me. "What is that?" I said, "Read it." He picked it up. I watched his eyes move across the page, then stop. For a moment, he did not say anything. My mother stepped closer. "What does it say?" she asked. He handed it to her without looking away from me. She read it. Her lips parted slightly. "This is not accurate. That is not what happened. You left, and you did not come back for over 3 hours." My father's jaw tightened. "It's out of context," he said. I almost laughed. "You left a 13-year-old alone in a public station. That is not context. That is a fact." He did not respond, because he couldn't. "You did not make me stronger. You made me invisible." The words hung there. My mother shook her head. "You survived. You built a life. That would not have happened if we hadn't pushed you." There it was again. The same logic. Untouched. Unchanged. I stepped back slightly. "You still think this was about helping me?" "It was," my father insisted. "No," I said. "It was about control." Silence. Then my mother spoke, now quieter. "We did what we thought was right." I held her gaze. "And now you get to live with what that actually was." They looked at me, confused, still not understanding. I exhaled slowly. I heard about the bet. That was the moment everything shifted. My father's expression flickered. My mother went completely still. Neither of them spoke. $50, I continued. "That's what I was worth to you." My mother's voice came out thin. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." My father tried to recover. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I asked. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there was nothing to say. I nodded once. "That's what I thought." I turned toward the door. My mother's voice followed me. "Where are you going?" I paused. "I did not come back for forgiveness. I came for the truth." "And now you have it," my father said. "So what do you want?" I looked over my shoulder. "I want you to face it." They did not move. They did not argue. They just stood there,
caught between what they believed and what they could no longer deny. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different, lighter, like something had finally shifted out of place. I walked to my car and got in. For a moment, I just sat there, my hands resting loosely in my lap. Then my phone started buzzing. I didn't need to look. I already knew who it was. It rang once, then again, then again. I picked it up, glanced at the screen, then set it face down on the seat. They could wait. For once, they could be the ones who didn't get an answer. I reached for my bag and pulled out my phone again. A different number this time. The reporter. I had already sent the documents earlier. Now I followed up. My name is attached to this. I paused for a second, then added one more line. Publish everything. The reply came almost immediately. Are you sure? I looked back at the house, at the windows, at the shadows moving inside. For years, they decided what version of me people believed. Now that was over. Yes, I typed. I set the phone down and leaned back in the seat. Calls kept coming. Their number. Over and over. I watched the screen light up, then go dark, then light up again. For a long time, I was the one who was waiting. Waiting for them to come back. Waiting for them to explain. Waiting for something that never came. Now it was their turn, and this time I was the one deciding. They thought they could turn my life into a lesson. They thought they could control how the story ended. They were wrong. Because this time, I was not the one being tested. I was the one writing the outcome.
Chapter 5. The quiet settled in slowly. The kind that does not rush in but stays once it arrives. For a long time, silence used to mean something was about to happen. It meant waiting, bracing, listening for footsteps or a voice that could shift everything in a second. Even years later, part of me still expected that feeling to come back. It did not. Now, it was just quiet. I stood in the kitchen of my apartment in Portland, watching Daniel move around the stove like he had nowhere else to be. He stirred the pan, checked the heat, wiped his hands on a towel, all in the same calm rhythm. "You're doing it again," he said without looking up. "Doing what?" "Watching everything like it might disappear." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I'm just getting used to it." "To what?" I looked around. The light was soft, nothing harsh, nothing waiting to break. "I'm just getting used to things staying the same," I said. He nodded once, like that made sense. That's not a bad thing to get used to. My phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, already knowing who it would be before I saw the name. Clara. I opened the message. Dad sold the shop. There was a second message right after. Mom barely leaves the house. People talk, everyone knows. I read it again, slower this time. For years, I thought this moment would feel bigger, louder, like something inside me would finally shift in a way I could not ignore. It did not. It felt small. Daniel glanced over. "Everything okay?" I set the phone down. "Yeah," I said. "It's just the ending." He waited, but he didn't push. "They lost it," I added after a second. "The store, the way people saw them, all of it." "And how does that feel?" I thought about it longer than I expected. "It feels like it took a long time, but it got there." He gave a small nod. "Sometimes that's how it works." We ate in that same quiet, not empty, just steady. Later that night, I sat on the couch while Rachel called in from Boston. Her face filled the screen, bright and direct as always. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Like you're not carrying something anymore." I leaned back. "Maybe I'm not." She studied me for a second. "Did you hear from them?" "Not directly, but I know what's happening." "And?" I let out a breath. "And it doesn't feel the way I thought it would." Rachel tilted her head. "That's not a bad thing." "No, it's not."
After the call ended, I sat there in the dim light, letting the quiet stretch without filling it. I thought about the house I walked into months ago, the way they looked at me like they were trying to recognize something they had already lost. I thought about the report on the table, the silence when there was nothing left to argue. I thought about the calls I never answered. And I realized something I had not been able to see before. They did not lose me that night. They lost the right to ever call themselves my parents. The thought didn't hit like anger. It settled, steady and clear. A few days later, a letter showed up. No return address, but I knew. I opened it at the table, reading it once, then again. I didn't think it would end like this. That was all it said. No apology, no explanation, just that. For a second, I waited to feel something. Maybe anger, or even disappointment. Nothing came. I folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease flat with my thumb. Daniel walked in, drying his hands. "Mail?" he asked. "Yeah. Anything important?" I looked at the letter, then shook my head. "No, nothing I need." He nodded and moved on, leaving me there with it. I used to think I needed them to understand, to admit what they did, to say it out loud so it would feel real. But it was already real. It always had been. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and dropped the letter into the trash. No hesitation, no second thought, just done. That night, we sat with the windows open. The city moved outside, distant and steady. Rachel texted about visiting. Daniel talked about what he wanted to cook next. Someone laughed, and it didn't feel fragile. It felt normal. And for the first time, normal didn't feel like something temporary. It felt like something I had built. I used to think family was something you were given, something you had to hold on to no matter what it cost you. I don't believe that anymore. Family is not where you come from. It's where you're allowed to stay without being tested, where you're seen without having to prove anything, where you're not asked to survive just to belong. If you have ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you have ever been told that pain was part of becoming stronger, you're not alone, and you're not wrong for walking away. Sometimes the hardest choice is the one that saves you, and sometimes the family you leave behind is the reason you finally find the one you choose. If you had to choose between staying loyal to the people who hurt you or protecting yourself, what would you do? If you value stories where strength is quiet but unshakable, subscribe.